Marie had lived in the small town of Ashford for nearly 15 years. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, where the roads were lined with modest homes, and where gossip spread like wildfire. Ever since her husband, Hall, had passed away 2 years ago, life had been difficult. He had been the breadwinner, the rock of their little family, and his sudden death in a construction accident had left Marie reeling. Now it was just her and her 2 children, Emma, age 12, and Josh, age 8. Every day felt like a fight for survival. Ashford wasn't a wealthy town, but nestled on its outskirts was a small enclave of lavish mansions that loomed like castles over the rest of the town. The people who lived there, families like the Coltons, had always seemed untouchable, almost like they existed in a different world. The Colton family, in particular, was the most powerful. They owned several businesses in town, had ties to local politicians, and were known for their opulence. But they were also known for their secrets. Rumors swirled about strange dealings behind their high iron gates, though no one had ever dared to investigate too closely. Marie had passed by the Colton estate many times on her way to work, always admiring the grandeur from afar. Her job at the local grocery store barely covered her bills, and every day felt like a struggle. She had long stopped dreaming of the finer things in life. Now her focus was simply on getting through the day and keeping her children fed and clothed. But today, something was different. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows over the streets as Marie made her way toward work. She always left early, hoping to avoid any confrontations with her landlord about the rent she was late on yet again. Her mind was already racing with thoughts about how to stretch her meager paycheck when something caught her eye. It was a large pile of discarded furniture and junks sitting outside the gates of the Colton estate. This wasn't an unusual sight. Wealthy families often threw away perfectly good items during renovations or after redecorating. But one piece in particular made Marie stop in her tracks. A huge, richly patterned carpet that was partially draped over the side of the dumpster. It looked out of place, far too luxurious to be tossed out like garbage. The intricate design was woven in deep reds and golds, and even from a distance, Marie could tell it was an expensive piece. Her heart raced as she approached, her eyes darting around nervously, as if someone might catch her in the act of simply looking. Why would someone throw something like this away? She wondered. Marie hesitated for a moment, glancing toward the towering gates of the Colton estate, half expecting someone to come out and shoo her away. But the mansion remained silent, the windows dark. The air around her felt heavy with quiet, the kind of stillness that made you feel like you were being watched even when no one was there. After a moment of internal debate, she stepped closer to the dumpster, her hands trembling slightly as she reached out to touch the edge of the carpet. The fabric was thick and soft beneath her fingers, and despite being tossed out, it was in immaculate condition. Surely this couldn't be trash. Maybe it had been a mistake, an oversight by some careless housekeeper or worker. Marie's first thought was practical. If she could clean the carpet up, she might be able to sell it or even use it in her own home. Her bare living room floor could certainly use something this beautiful. She began tugging at the heavy carpet, trying to pull it free from the jumble of items in the dumpster. As she heaved the carpet over the edge, something fell out from its folds. A thick envelope, yellowed with age, its corners slightly crumpled. It landed with a soft thud on the pavement at her feet. Marie froze, staring down at the envelope. There was something strange about it, something that didn't fit. She bent down and picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It wasn't sealed, and inside she could feel the weight of what seemed like papers or documents. Her heart pounded in her chest as she slowly opened the envelope. Inside were several sheets of parchment paper, old and fragile, covered in strange symbols and drawings that looked like they had been hastily scribbled by someone in a rush. There was a map, an old hand-drawn map of the town, but with markings she didn't recognize, and accompanying the map were documents that looked like deeds, signed in names she had never heard of before. What is this? Marie thought, her fingers trembling slightly as she leafed through the papers. None of it made sense, but one thing was clear. These documents were important. Mary felt a sudden wave of panic. Why were these papers hidden inside the carpet? Had someone meant to throw them away, or had this been an accident? And what were they doing in the possession of the Coltons? A deep sense of unease settled over her. She quickly tucked the envelope into her bag, her mind racing with questions. Something about this didn't feel right. The Coltons were powerful, and people in town tended to stay away from their business. But now Marie had stumbled onto something that didn't seem like it was meant to be found. She glanced around nervously, suddenly aware of how exposed she was, standing outside the gates of the most powerful family in town with a carpet and documents that likely belonged to them. What if someone saw her? What if they came looking for what she had just taken? With the carpet draped awkwardly over her shoulder and the envelope safely hidden away, Marie hurried down the street, her thoughts spinning in 1,000 different directions. She didn't know what she had just found, but she knew one thing for sure. Her life was about to change, and not necessarily for the better. As she made her way back to her house, a chilling thought struck her. What if this discovery wasn't a mistake? What if someone had deliberately discarded the carpet, hoping it would be found by someone like her? And if that was the case, what had she just stumbled into? Marie tried to push the thoughts away, but the nagging feeling of unease stayed with her. There was something more going on here, something that went far deeper than a simple discarded luxury item. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a chain of events that would soon unravel the quiet, ordinary life she had known and expose the dark, hidden secrets of the town she had called home for so long. Marie hurried home, with the carpet draped over her shoulder, her mind swirling with questions about what she had just discovered. The old envelope full of documents weighed heavily in her bag, as though it carried secrets too heavy for her to comprehend. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, but what was she supposed to do now? She was just an ordinary woman, trying to survive in a town that had long forgotten her. What business did she have poking into the affairs of the Colton family? The Coltons had always been a mystery. They lived in their grand mansion, isolated from the rest of the town by tall iron gates and dense trees that blocked the view of their property from prying eyes. People in Ashford gossiped about them. Of course, how could they not? The Coltons were the wealthiest family in the area, their fortune stretching back generations. They owned nearly every business in town, and their influence could be felt in the smallest details of daily life. There were whispers of shady dealings, of under-the-table arrangements that had kept the family in power for so long, but no one had ever dared to question them openly. Marie, like everyone else in town, had grown up with the quiet understanding that the Coltons were untouchable. People had learned to keep their heads down, grateful for whatever crumbs of wealth trickled down from the family's control. It wasn't unusual for the Coltons to throw away expensive things, either clothes, furniture, electronics, things that most people in Ashford could never afford. The townspeople had grown accustomed to scavenging through their discarded belongings, finding treasures in the trash that helped them get by. But this felt different. Mary couldn't get the strange documents out of her mind. They weren't just old, they felt ancient, like they belonged to a time long before the Coltons had come into power. The map, in particular, had unsettled her. It wasn't like any modern map she had seen. It was hand-drawn, with odd symbols and landmarks that didn't exist anymore, and yet there was something eerily familiar about it, as though the land it depicted had once been part of the town before it was reshaped by time and progress. By the time she arrived back at her modest house, Marie felt as if she were carrying the weight of something far greater than herself. The carpet was heavy, but the burden of the mystery she had uncovered was even heavier. She dropped the carpet in her small living room and pulled the envelope out of her bag, her hands shaking slightly as she opened it again. She laid the papers out on her kitchen table, staring at them in the dim light. The old deeds were written in faded ink, the names barely legible, but one name caught her eye: Elias Colton. It was a name she had heard before, though only in whispers. He was the patriarch of the Colton family, a man whose wealth and influence had founded the Colton Empire over a century ago. But what did these papers have to do with him? And why had they been hidden inside a carpet, discarded like garbage? The more she thought about it, the stranger it seemed. These weren't the kinds of documents you just threw away, especially not if they were connected to the founding of the Colton fortune. Could it have been a mistake? Had someone accidentally thrown them out during the renovations, or was there something more deliberate at play here? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Marie jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. She quickly gathered up the papers and stuffed them back into the envelope, tucking it into a drawer before answering the door. When she opened it, she found herself face to face with a man she didn't recognize. He was tall and dressed in a dark suit, his hair slicked back neatly, and he had a calm, almost unnerving demeanor. His eyes scanned her briefly before locking onto hers with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thompson?" the man asked, his voice smooth and polite, though there was a cold edge to it. Marie nodded, unsure of what to say. "I apologize for the intrusion," the man continued, "but I work for the Colton family. We seem to have misplaced something during the recent renovations, and I was hoping you might have seen it. A rather large carpet, very valuable. We'd be happy to compensate you for any trouble it may have caused." Marie's blood ran cold. How could they have known so quickly? She hadn't even had the chance to figure out what was happening. And now they were already at her door, asking questions. The way the man spoke, so polite, so measured, only made her more nervous. There was no warmth in his voice, no friendliness. It was clear that this wasn't a request. It was a demand wrapped in the guise of civility. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't see anything like that." The man's eyes narrowed slightly, and for a moment Marie thought he might push the issue. But then he smiled, a thin, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I see. Well, if you happen to come across it, do let us know. We wouldn't want something so valuable to end up in the wrong hands." There was a subtle warning in his words, one that sent a chill down Marie's spine. She nodded quickly, and the man turned to leave without another word, his footsteps echoing down the front steps as he walked away. Marie closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. They knew. Somehow, they knew she had found the carpet, and now they were looking for it. But it wasn't just the carpet they were after, it was the documents. She was sure of it now. The Coltons didn't care about the carpet itself. They cared about what had been hidden inside. For the next few days, Marie kept a low profile. She went to work, took care of her children, and tried to act as though everything was normal. But the truth was, she was terrified. She had no idea what to do with the documents or how much danger she might be in for simply possessing them. She thought about going to the police, but something told her that the Coltons' influence extended far beyond the town's borders. If they wanted those papers, they would find a way to get them, no matter who she turned to for help. And then there was the matter of the map. What was it leading to? The more she looked at it, the more she realized that it wasn't just a map of the town as it was now. It was a map of what the town had been before the Coltons had reshaped it. Landmarks that no longer existed, old properties that had been torn down or rebuilt, all marked in intricate detail. And at the center of it all was an X, marking a location just outside of town, in a forested area that had long been abandoned. Mary couldn't help but wonder, was this what the Coltons were trying to hide? Was there something out there, something they didn't want anyone to find? Her curiosity got the better of her. One evening, after her children had gone to bed, Marie took the map and headed out to the location it marked. The night was cold, and the wind whispered through the trees as she made her way into the dark forest. She had grown up hearing stories about this place, old, half-forgotten tales of strange occurrences, of things that were better left undisturbed. But now, standing in the heart of the forest, she felt a pull, a need to uncover whatever secret had been buried here. She found the spot easily enough, though the forest had reclaimed much of the land. What had once been a clearing was now overgrown with weeds and vines, but beneath the surface, Marie could feel something, a presence, almost, as though the land itself was holding its breath. She knelt down and began to dig, her fingers cold and numb in the earth. And then, after what felt like hours, she hit something hard. Her heart raced as she cleared away the dirt, revealing a small weathered box, its surface covered in strange carvings that matched the symbols on the map. With trembling hands, Marie pried the box open, and what she found inside made her blood run cold. The box was filled with old photographs, each one showing the Colton family through the ages. But these weren't ordinary family portraits. The people in the photographs were always the same, unchanged, unaged, as though they had remained frozen in time. And at the center of each photograph was Elias Colton, staring directly into the camera with a look of knowing that sent shivers down Marie's spine. She closed the box quickly, her mind racing. What had she just uncovered? How could it be possible? And what did this mean for the Coltons, and for her? As she stood up, ready to leave, she felt a presence behind her. She turned, her breath catching in her throat. There, standing at the edge of the clearing, was the man from the Colton estate, watching her with cold, unblinking eyes. "Mrs. Thompson," he said softly, stepping forward. "I told you, some things are better left unfound." Mary stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest, as the man from the Colton estate stepped closer. The dim light of the moon barely illuminated his figure, casting long shadows across the forest floor. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. The small weathered box in Marie's hands suddenly felt like a weight too heavy to hold. What had she uncovered? And how had this man found her in the middle of the night, in the middle of the forest? Her mind raced, trying to piece together how everything had escalated so quickly. What started with a discarded carpet had now led her to this eerie encounter in a place she should have never been. And yet something deep inside her told her that she had to keep pushing forward, that this moment was a turning point, not just for her, but for her entire town. The Coltons had been hiding something for generations, and now she was right in the center of it. The man, dressed in his dark suit, paused just a few feet away from her. His face was calm, too calm, as if he wasn't at all surprised by what Marie had found. He tilted his head slightly, examining the box in her hands as though it was a mere trinket, nothing of real importance. "Mrs. Thompson," he said again, his voice smooth and almost gentle, "you've come quite far for someone who claimed not to know anything." Marie felt a lump form in her throat. She had been caught. There was no denying it now. The man's cold eyes seemed to bore into her, waiting for an explanation. But what could she say? That she'd found a mysterious map hidden in a carpet thrown out by his employers. That she'd followed it here, to an abandoned part of town, only to uncover a box full of photographs that defied explanation. She glanced down at the box in her hands, then back up at the man. Her legs were trembling, but she knew she couldn't show fear. Not now. Not when she had come this far. "What is this?" she asked, her voice shaky but determined. "What are these pictures, and why are they hidden out here?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, his shoes crunching on the forest floor. He was close enough now that Marie could see the sharp lines of his face, the pale skin that seemed almost unnatural in the moonlight. He gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, one that chilled her to the core. "Curiosity can be dangerous, Mrs. Thompson," he said softly. "You've stumbled into something that you don't fully understand. These are not things meant for people like you." Marie felt a surge of anger rising inside her. People like you. That phrase, dripping with arrogance, struck a nerve. It was the same attitude she had always sensed from the Coltons and the other wealthy families in town. They looked down on people like her, working class, struggling, trying to survive while the rich lived in their isolated mansions. For so long, she had felt powerless against that system, but not anymore. "I think I have a right to know," Marie said, her voice firmer now. These pictures, these papers, they're connected to your family, aren't they? Elias Colton, the man who founded your family's fortune. What does he have to do with all of this? The man's expression darkened. For the first time, Marie saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something like fear. He took another step forward, but this time, there was no hint of a smile. You need to walk away, he said quietly. Take your children and leave this town. I'll make sure you're well compensated. But if you stay, if you keep digging, there will be consequences. Marie's pulse quickened. There it was. The threat she had been waiting for. It wasn't spoken outright, but the weight of it hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. And yet she couldn't walk away now. Not after everything she had discovered. Not after realizing that this wasn't just about her. It was about the entire town. The Coltons had been in control for far too long, and whatever they were hiding had clearly been kept secret for generations. Why else would they go to such lengths to conceal it? I'm not going anywhere, Marie said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Whatever this is, people deserve to know the truth. I deserve to know the truth. The man's face twisted in frustration. He stepped closer, and Marie instinctively took a step back. The moonlight caught his eyes, and for a split second, she thought she saw something unnatural in them, something inhuman. But it was gone, as quickly as it appeared. You have no idea what you're dealing with, he said, his voice low and threatening. This is bigger than you, bigger than this town. There are forces at work here that you can't even begin to understand. And if you keep pushing, you'll find yourself in far more danger than you can imagine. Marie's heart raced, but she refused to back down. The box in her hand suddenly felt like a lifeline, a key to unlocking the mystery that had haunted this town for decades. She wasn't going to let it go. Not now. Before the man could say anything else, there was a rustling in the bushes behind him. Marie's breath caught in her throat, and the man turned sharply, his eyes scanning the darkness. For a moment, there was silence, thick, suffocating silence. And then, out of the shadows, another figure emerged. It was an old man, hunched over with age, but with sharp, piercing eyes that gleamed in the moonlight. His clothes were tattered, as if he had been living on the fringes of society for years, but there was something regal about him, something that commanded respect despite his ragged appearance. The man in the suit stiffened, his body language shifting from cold confidence to something more defensive. Leave her alone, the old man said, his voice raspy but firm. Marie blinked in surprise. Who was this man? And why was he defending her? The man in the suit took a step back, clearly agitated by the newcomer's presence. This doesn't concern you, old man, he said, his voice laced with irritation. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. But the old man didn't budge. He stepped forward, placing himself between Marie and the man in the suit. There was something in his posture, something in the way he carried himself, that made it clear he wasn't afraid. She has a right to know, the old man said, his eyes narrowing. You and your family have been hiding this for too long. The truth always comes out, eventually. The man in the suit hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting between the old man and Marie. For the first time, Marie saw doubt flicker across his face. He took a deep breath, his jaw clenched, and then he stepped back. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and menacing. You've both made a grave mistake, and you'll pay for it. With that, he turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Marie and the old man standing alone in the clearing. The tension in the air slowly dissipated, but Marie's heart was still pounding in her chest. She turned to the old man, her mind racing with questions. Who are you? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The old man smiled faintly, though there was sadness in his eyes. I'm someone who's been watching this town for a long time, he said. Someone who knows what the Coltons are hiding, and why they're so desperate to keep it a secret. Marie stared at him, her mind reeling. But what is it? What are they hiding? The old man glanced down at the box in her hands, then back up at her. "It's not just money or power," he said quietly. "It's something far darker than that. Something that stretches back generations, to a time when Elias Colton wasn't just a man, but something more." Marie's breath caught in her throat. She had suspected that there was more to the Colton family than met the eye. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. The old man reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've come this far," he said softly. "But if you want to know the full truth, you'll have to be ready for what comes next. Because once you uncover their secret, there's no going back." Marie nodded, her grip tightening on the box. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't stop now. The truth, whatever it was within her grasp. And no matter what it cost her, she was going to uncover it. Marie felt the weight of the old man's words pressing down on her, as if the very air around them had thickened with the magnitude of what he had just implied. Elias Colton, once thought of as a mere businessman who had built his family's fortune through shrewd deals and land acquisitions, was something more, something darker. What could that possibly mean? How could someone, a man long dead, be more than just a man? And what did this old man know that had kept him in the shadows for so long? The forest around them was eerily silent, as if the trees themselves were listening to the conversation, holding their breath along with Marie. The box in her hand seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the secrets it held were too powerful to remain hidden any longer. She felt a sense of dread wash over her, but it was accompanied by a steely resolve. She had come too far to turn back now. The old man shifted his weight, the lines on his face deepening with the burden of the knowledge he carried. His eyes were distant, as though he was remembering things that no one should have had to live through. "Years ago," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "before the Coltons rose to power, this town was just a collection of simple farms and families. People lived off the land, worked hard, and were content with what little they had. But Elias Colton, he wasn't content. He wanted more, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it." Marie listened intently, hanging on every word. This was the history of her town, but it was a history she had never heard before. Elias wasn't just a businessman, the old man continued. He dabbled in darker things, things that most people don't believe in anymore. But back then, there were whispers of old magic, of pacts made in the dead of night. The land he acquired wasn't just valuable for farming or mining. It held something else, something ancient. Elias knew it, and he used it to build his empire. Marie's mind raced. Magic, pacts. It sounded absurd, like something out of an old legend. But as she stood there in the cold night, holding the strange photographs and papers in her hands, she couldn't dismiss the possibility that there was more to the Coltons' power than wealth alone. "What kind of pacts?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The old man's eyes darkened. Elias made a deal with forces he didn't fully understand. He thought he could control them, bend them to his will. And for a while, it worked. The Colton family prospered. They became rich beyond imagination, their influence spreading far beyond this town. But there was a price. There's always a price. Marie felt a chill run down her spine. What was the price? The old man hesitated, as if the weight of the answer was too much to bear. He looked down at the ground, his shoulders sagging under the invisible burden he carried. "Elias and his descendants were bound to the land," he said softly, "and to the entity that gave them their power. As long as they remained in control of the land, their wealth and power would grow. But they couldn't leave. Not truly. They were trapped in a way. And over the years, the Coltons became less human. They aged, but they didn't die. They became something else, something unnatural." Marie's heart pounded in her chest. It sounded impossible, but at the same time, it made a twisted kind of sense. The photographs in the box, the ones that showed Elias and his descendants, seemingly unchanged over the decades, flashed through her mind. Could it really be true? Had the Coltons made some kind of dark pact to preserve their power, at the cost of their humanity? But why hide it? She asked, her voice shaking. Why throw these documents away now, after all these years? The old man sighed heavily. Because something is changing. The pact is weakening. The Coltons' hold on this town isn't what it once was. That's why they've been renovating, expanding, trying to tighten their grip. But the land, it's rejecting them now. The balance is shifting, and they're desperate to maintain control. That's why they can't afford for someone like you to uncover the truth. Marie felt a surge of fear and adrenaline. She was in far deeper than she had ever imagined. If the Coltons were losing their power, and if they knew she had the documents that could expose them, they would stop at nothing to silence her. But that didn't deter her. If anything, it made her more determined. Is there any way to stop them? She asked, her voice filled with urgency, to break their hold on the town. The old man looked at her with weary eyes. There might be, he said slowly, but it won't be easy. The Coltons' power is tied to the land itself, and breaking that bond would require an act of great sacrifice. They've kept their secrets buried for generations, and they won't let go of their power without a fight. But if you can find the source of their power, the place where Elias made the original pact, you might be able to destroy it. Marie swallowed hard. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn. She was just an ordinary woman, a widow with 2 children, trying to make ends meet. And now she was being thrust into a battle far bigger than herself, a battle against an ancient force that had controlled her town for generations. Where is it? She asked. The source of their power. The old man hesitated again, as if weighing the consequences of what he was about to say. Then, finally, he spoke. It's in the old Colton crypt, he said quietly, out on the edge of their property. No one's been there in years, but that's where it all began. That's where Elias made his pact. If you can find a way to get inside, you might be able to sever the connection. Marie's stomach twisted in knots. The crypt. She had heard rumors about it, of course. Stories passed down through the years about how the Coltons buried their dead in a private mausoleum, far from the town cemetery. But no one had ever dared to go near it. The stories said it was cursed, that strange things happened to anyone who ventured too close. But now, it seemed, the crypt held the key to everything. Before Marie could ask anything else, the old man stepped back, his gaze softening. You should be careful, he warned. The Coltons won't let you do this without a fight. They've kept their secret for too long, and they'll do anything to protect it. But if you succeed, you might finally free this town from their grip. Marie nodded, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. She knew what she had to do, even if the thought of facing the Coltons head-on terrified her. This was bigger than her family. It was about the future of the town, about breaking the cycle of control that had kept them all under the Coltons' thumb for generations. With a final glance at the box in her hands, Marie made up her mind. She would go to the crypt. She would find the source of the Coltons' power and destroy it, no matter the cost. For her children, for her town, for the truth. The old man gave her a small, knowing nod, as if he could see the resolve in her eyes. Good luck, he said quietly. You'll need it. Marie watched as he turned and disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone in the clearing once more. The night seemed even darker now, as if the trees were closing in around her, watching her every move. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She tucked the box under her arm and began the long walk back home, her mind already racing with plans. She would have to be careful. She would have to prepare. The Coltons would be watching her, waiting for her to make a move, but she was ready for them. As she walked through the darkened forest, Marie felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The fear was still there, but it was tempered by a quiet, burning determination. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been crushed under the weight of the Coltons' power. And she wouldn't stop until they were free. In the distance, she could see the lights of her small house, the place where her children slept, unaware of the danger that was closing in on them. She would protect them, no matter what. And when it was all over, when the truth finally came to light, they would be safe. But first, she had to face the Coltons. And she had to win. The next morning, Marie awoke with the weight of her decision still pressing heavily on her chest. She had tossed and turned all night, replaying the old man's words over and over in her mind. The Coltons had made a pact, an ancient and dark deal, one that had bound them to the land and given them untold power. If what he said was true, they had used that power to build their wealth and control over Ashford for generations. But now, that power was weakening, and the Coltons were growing desperate to maintain their hold. And Marie, an ordinary widow, was the only one standing in their way. As she prepared breakfast for Emma and Josh, she glanced at the box she had hidden in the back of a kitchen cabinet. Its contents, those eerie, unchanging photographs of the Colton family, and the map that led to the crypt, felt like they were burning a hole through her thoughts. She could still see Elias Colton's face in her mind, staring out from the old black and white photographs with eyes that seemed far too alive for a man who should have been long dead. Her children, unaware of the turmoil swirling around them, ate their cereal quietly. Josh laughed at something his sister said, and Emma gave him a playful shove. Marie smiled at them, trying to hide the anxiety gnawing at her insides. They were her world, the reason she had to do this. She couldn't let the Coltons' shadow loom over their future, like it had for so many others in town. After they left for school, Marie sat at the kitchen table, staring at the box. She knew what she had to do. She had to go to the crypt, find the source of the Coltons' power, and destroy it. But how? The crypt was on their property, and she had no doubt it was heavily guarded, not just by fences and gates, but by whatever dark forces the Coltons had bound themselves to. She needed help. Marie thought of the few people in town who might be willing to stand with her, but the more she considered it, the more she realized how isolated she was. The Coltons had their fingers in every part of Ashford. Most people were too afraid to cross them, too afraid of losing their jobs, their homes, their security. And even those who might be sympathetic wouldn't believe her if she told them about the dark magic at the heart of the Coltons' power. Her mind drifted to the stranger, the man in the suit, who had come to her door. His warning had been clear. The Coltons were willing to do anything to protect their secret. If they knew she had the documents, if they knew she was getting closer to the truth, they would come for her. And not just her children too. A surge of protectiveness washed over Marie. No, she couldn't involve anyone else. This was something she had to do alone. But how could she possibly succeed against a family as powerful as the Coltons? The answer came to her in a flash of clarity. She had to strike when they least expected it. Mary spent the next few days carefully planning her next move. She worked at the grocery store during the day, trying to act normal, while keeping an eye out for any signs that the Coltons were watching her. At night, after the kids were asleep, she studied the map, memorizing the layout of the Colton estate and the location of the crypt. It was far off to the side of the property, hidden by a grove of old trees. Few people in town even knew it existed, and those who did avoided talking about it. But Marie knew that whatever power the Coltons had drawn from the land was tied to that crypt, and that was where she had to go. The night finally came. It was a clear, cold evening, with the sky full of stars and the faintest sliver of a moon hanging overhead. Marie waited until her children were sound asleep before slipping out of the house. She left a note on the kitchen counter, just in case, explaining that she had to take care of something important, but that she would be back. She prayed it would be true. She had dressed in dark clothes and wore a backpack containing only the essentials, a flashlight, the map, and the box with the photographs and documents. She hoped she wouldn't need anything else, but a nagging part of her mind told her that this was a foolishly optimistic assumption. The walk to the Colton estate felt longer than usual, each step carrying with it a growing sense of dread. The mansion loomed in the distance, its dark silhouette outlined against the night sky. The windows were mostly dark, but a few lights glowed faintly, a reminder that the Coltons were always watching, even in the dead of night. Marie circled the perimeter of the estate, staying close to the cover of the trees, careful to avoid any security cameras or guards. She knew they had surveillance. No family as wealthy and secretive as the Coltons would leave their property unguarded. But she had spent enough time studying the map to know where the blind spots were, and she moved quickly and quietly, her breath fogging in the cold air. When she reached the edge of the crypt's grove, she paused, crouching low behind a large tree. Her heart was racing, her palms slick with sweat despite the cold. The crypt stood ahead, partially hidden by the gnarled branches of ancient oak trees. It was smaller than she had expected, but imposing nonetheless, a squat, stone structure with a heavy iron door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if the old man had been wrong? What if there was nothing inside that crypt except dust and old bones? Or worse, what if there was something inside? Something far more dangerous than she had anticipated. But there was no turning back now. The lives of her children, her future, and the future of Ashford all depended on what she found inside that crypt. Marie approached cautiously, keeping low as she moved through the underbrush. She reached the crypt door, her hands trembling slightly as she grasped the cold iron handle. It was locked, of course, but she had expected that. From her backpack, she pulled out a small crowbar, a tool she had borrowed from a friend under the guise of a home repair project. She wedged it into the doorframe and pushed with all her strength. For a long moment, nothing happened. The door held fast, the iron groaning under the pressure. But just as Marie was about to give up, there was a sharp crack, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. Marie's breath caught in her throat as she stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and something else, something ancient and malevolent. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the stone walls of the crypt. Cobwebs hung in thick clusters from the ceiling, and the floor was littered with debris, old leaves, dust, and broken stones. At the far end of the crypt, she saw it, a large stone sarcophagus, its surface carved with strange symbols that matched the one she had seen on the map and in the photographs. Her heart pounded as she approached, the flashlight trembling in her hand. This was it, the source of the Coltons' power. Marie set the flashlight down and ran her fingers over the carvings on the sarcophagus. The stone was cold, but she could feel a faint pulse of energy beneath it, as though the crypt itself was alive with the dark magic that had bound the Colton family to the land. With a deep breath, she pushed against the lid of the sarcophagus. It was heavy, far heavier than she had anticipated, and for a moment, she thought she wouldn't be able to move it. But then, slowly, it began to shift, the stone scraping against the crypt floor with a loud, grating sound. As the lid slid off, Marie gasped. Inside the sarcophagus wasn't a body, but something far worse. It was an altar, a dark, twisted thing made of black stone, and covered in symbols that made her stomach turn just to look at. At the center of the altar was a small, glowing object, a crystal, pulsing faintly with an unnatural light. This was it. This was the source of the Coltons' power, the artifact that had bound them to the land and given them their wealth and influence. Marie knew what she had to do. With trembling hands, she reached into the sarcophagus and grasped the crystal. It was cold to the touch, and as soon as her fingers closed around it, she felt a surge of energy rush through her, nearly knocking her off her feet. She could hear whispers, distant, ancient voices, filling her mind, urging her to stop, to turn back, to leave the crystal where it lay. But she didn't listen. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, Marie pulled the crystal free from the altar and held it high above her head. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but she ignored them. With a scream of defiance, she hurled the crystal to the ground, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. The moment the crystal shattered, the air in the crypt seemed to shift. The dark energy that had filled the room dissipated, replaced by an eerie, almost unnatural silence. Marie stood there, panting, her heart racing, unsure of what had just happened. But then, slowly, she felt it. The Coltons' power was breaking. The bond they had forged with the land, the pact they had made all those years ago, was unraveling. She had done it. Marie stumbled out of the crypt, her legs weak and her mind spinning. The stars. Marie staggered out of the crypt, her body trembling from the surge of adrenaline and exhaustion. The night air felt shockingly cold against her skin, but she barely noticed. Her heart was still pounding in her chest, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She had destroyed the source of the Coltons' power. She had shattered the crystal that had held the dark energy binding them to the land. But what now? The night was deathly still, the oppressive silence from within the crypt now hanging heavily outside as well. The stars glittered overhead, but they felt distant, cold, and indifferent. Marie's legs felt like they could barely carry her, but she knew she couldn't linger here. The Coltons would know. Somehow they would know what she had done. And when they did, they would come for her. She had to get back to her children. The thought of Emma and Josh waiting for her at home fueled her as she moved swiftly through the woods, her senses heightened, every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves making her jump. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see one of the Coltons, or their shadowy agents, lurking in the darkness, ready to strike. But as the minutes passed and she saw no one, Marie's thoughts shifted. What would happen now that the Coltons' power had been broken? Would they simply lose their wealth and influence, or would something more catastrophic happen? The old man had warned her that the Coltons weren't just wealthy. They were something else, something unnatural. Had she severed that unnatural tie, or had she simply released something even worse? Her feet hit the pavement as she emerged from the woods and entered the outskirts of the town. The streets were eerily quiet, most of the town still asleep, blissfully unaware of the monumental shift that had just occurred. But as Marie hurried past darkened houses and empty storefronts, she began to notice something strange. A heaviness in the air, like the town itself was holding its breath. Ashford had always felt like it was under the Coltons' shadow, like an invisible hand was pressing down on the town, controlling everything, from the businesses to the people's livelihoods. But now, that hand was gone. The air felt lighter, but also uncertain, as if the town was in limbo, waiting for something to happen. Marie reached her house, her heart pounding as she fumbled with the key to unlock the door. She pushed it open and stepped inside, the familiar warmth of her home wrapping around her like a protective blanket. The sight of Emma and Josh's backpacks by the door grounded her, reminding her why she had done all of this. She quietly moved through the house, checking on her children, who were sound asleep in their beds, unaware of the danger that had come so close. Marie stood in the doorway of their rooms for a moment, watching them breathe peacefully, her chest tightening with emotion. She had done it for them. She had taken on the Coltons, the most powerful family in Ashford, and won. But the weight of what came next pressed heavily on her. Marie returned to the kitchen, where she sat down at the table, staring at her hands. They were still shaking, her body still reeling from the physical and emotional toll of the night. What would happen to the Coltons now? She knew that their influence over the town was broken. But what about them? Would they come for her? And what about the deeper forces at play, the ones that had made the Coltons what they were? Just as her mind was beginning to spiral with questions, a soft knock came at the door. Marie's heart leaped into her throat. For a moment, she was frozen, fear gripping her chest like a vice. Who could it be at this hour? Had the Coltons already realized what she had done? Were they here to take revenge? She stood up slowly, moving cautiously toward the door. She peered through the peephole and saw the last person she expected. The old man from the forest. Marie opened the door a crack, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" The old man stepped forward, his weathered face lined with exhaustion, but his eyes gleamed with something she hadn't seen before, relief, maybe even hope. "I had to see for myself," he said, his voice raspy. "You did it, didn't you? You broke their hold." Marie nodded, stepping back to let him inside. "I think so," she said, her voice shaky. "But I don't know what happens next. Will they come for me? For my children?" The old man closed the door behind him and sat down at the kitchen table, letting out a long breath. "The Coltons have been bound to this land for generations," he said slowly. "Their power came from that crystal, from the pact Elias made. Without it, they're just human. But that doesn't mean they won't be dangerous. They'll still have their wealth, their resources, and they'll be furious. But they can't control the town anymore. Their influence is broken." Marie sat down across from him, her mind racing. "But what about the darker things? The forces Elias made a pact with? Are they gone too?" The old man shook his head. "I don't know. Magic like that doesn't just disappear. But without the crystal, the Coltons don't have the same connection to those forces. The land will start to heal. The town will start to heal. But it's going to take time." Marie swallowed hard. "And what about the Coltons? What will they do now?" The old man looked down at his hands, the silence stretching out between them. "I don't know. But they've lost everything that made them powerful. They'll fight to get it back, but they won't succeed. Not this time. Their time is over." Marie leaned back in her chair, a sense of relief washing over her, though it was tinged with uncertainty. The Coltons might not have their supernatural power anymore, but they were still dangerous, and she had made herself their enemy. "Will they come after me?" she asked quietly. The old man looked at her with a seriousness that made her stomach twist. "They might try. But the town is on your side now. People are going to see what the Coltons really are, what they've done. You've given them a chance to take back their lives." Marie thought about the people of Ashford, the ones who had suffered under the Coltons' control for so long, who had lived in fear of crossing the powerful family. She had broken that grip, but she knew it would take time for people to realize they were free. "And what about you?" Marie asked, glancing at the old man. "What will you do now?" The old man gave a weary smile. "My work is done," he said simply. "I've been watching the Coltons for a long time, waiting for someone like you to come along. Now it's time for me to rest." Marie didn't ask what he meant by that. There was something timeless about the old man, something that made her think he had been around far longer than anyone realized. The silence between them grew comfortable, and for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun, Marie felt a sense of peace. She had done the impossible. She had taken on the most powerful family in Ashford and won. But she also knew that the fight wasn't over yet. The Coltons would regroup, and they would try to reclaim their place. But without their dark magic, they were just people, people who could be fought, people who could be defeated. As dawn began to break outside the window, casting a pale light over the town, Marie knew that things would never be the same. The Coltons' reign over Ashford was over, and the town would begin to heal. But as she sat there in the quiet of her kitchen, listening to the sounds of her children stirring upstairs, she realized that she had been transformed too. She was no longer just a widow trying to survive. She was a fighter, someone who had faced the darkness and come out the other side. And whatever came next, she was ready for it.